Hi researchers, this is Dr. Balhan. Some of you know me as Krystle. I'm so glad we have class together this quarter, and I do wish that we were able to meet in person. For now though, we will make do with Canvas. This short video is intended to expound upon the bullet points that are in the Decolonizing Methodologies PDF that I already have posted to our Week 1 module. So after you read the chapter called Colonizing Knowledges by Linda Tuivasa-Smith, you might have discovered a lot of problems with research, maybe even with Western research that we're very familiar with. And so these questions here are maybe good ones for you to mull over. Can research ever truly be socially just, decolonized, liberating? There's no right or wrong answer here, and we're going to be grappling with this throughout much of the quarter. What I'd like to do is progress through the PowerPoint, kind of noting the differences between what most of us are familiar with in terms of science and research and what Linda Tuivasa-Smith was beginning to suggest as another way of knowing, or an indigenous way of knowing. You might also hear me or others refer to that way of knowing as a feminist way. So first we're going to ask this ontological question, which is really one about the nature of reality. When we're living on the left side of the PowerPoint here in the Western world, the reality is really considered singular. There is one that a researcher could discover, and it's objective. So the positionality of the researcher doesn't really matter in the discovery of what is true. On the flip side, the right side with the indigenous ways of knowing, the nature of reality is considered to be multiple and subjective, and it is in fact constructed by individuals. An example of this might be found in more modern conventions in literature, where the same story will be told from multiple characters' perspectives, and then we as readers discover that the same events are in fact quite different depending on who's retelling or recounting the events. Okay, so the same might go for research. In the indigenous side of things, it would be important who the researcher is in their subjective discovery of reality. This next question, which is about how do we know what we know, this is epistemological, so it's the nature of knowing. On the Western side of things, the way we know what we know is we distance ourselves from our subject to maintain that sense of objectivity, and the researcher can discover the truth. On the indigenous side, the researcher is in fact not distanced, but very active in acquiring this knowledge, and they have a role in constructing understanding. I think one way to consider this is think about how you have ever developed a skill. How have you learned how to do something? It's possible that maybe you did observation from afar, or you did some reading to learn, but most likely you practiced. You were right there involved in the doing. That's maybe more on that indigenous side if we flip into the research world, where the researcher will really be involved in the doing or in the development of knowledge. Next question we'll ask is about values. What are their roles in research? This is an axiological question. On the Western side of things, the assumptions are that values should be eliminated and therefore can be eliminated. So when you are reading a scientific work, you can say this is objective, free from values, so it must be the truth, or it must point toward that discoverable truth. On the indigenous side of things, we'd say that it's never possible for a human to completely remove their own values. Therefore, we need to acknowledge them, explicitly state them, and then work from there. One example that I can give from my own experience is my dissertation was a qualitative study of widows, older widowed women, in fact, and I had some values based in my feminist identity and some personal stake in the fact that my own grandmother had recently become a widow. And as I proposed my study to my panel of faculty, one of the big questions that I got from folks who were very unfamiliar with qualitative research was how could this research be non-biased, given that I was a feminist researcher? And so that's a great question to ask if the research is coming from the Western side of things, because the assumption is about non-bias. That question doesn't make a ton of sense to ask on the other side, because in doing the acknowledgement of values, the Indigenous researchers or feminist researchers would say that is the work of, let's say, minimizing or negating those values' impact on our research. Regarding language, this is a question of rhetoric. When we're reading a scientific study, you probably have seen it yourself. The language is highly specialized, it's formal and technical, gives off the feeling that there are experts who are intended to read this and the rest of us perhaps not. Often it'll be written in third person and in passive voice. Now, when you were reading the Colonizing Knowledges chapter, that probably wasn't your take of the tone. Usually students tell me that when they read that chapter or other ones from Linda Tuivai-Smith's book, they find that she sounds angry. She sounds like she has a perspective and that she is personally invested. And that's actually the language of research on the Indigenous side of things. So the language will come across perhaps as more informal, kind of inviting more people in, and the personal is injected throughout. So that brings us kind of back to that overarching question, or questions that I pose. Can research ever truly be socially just, decolonized, liberating? Maybe now you're mulling over the idea that, if we find ways to maybe blend the Western side and the Indigenous side, maybe we can move closer to a liberating kind of research. If we ask questions that are best answered from an Indigenous perspective, maybe we move over to methods from there. And then there might be some really good reasons to ask questions and use the Western side of things, but maybe we can inject some of the idea that we're still human researchers doing that Western science. So where are values? What kind of assumptions might there still be? And we'll continue that kind of inquiry throughout the quarter, because you are going to be proposing your own research projects. And the requirement of them is that you can make some justification and argument that there is a social justice purpose to your research. So I'm looking forward to those. That's really the pinnacle of the class. Thank you for listening to this short lecture. As always, please feel encouraged to reach out to me through Canvas Messenger or through email with any kinds of questions you might have. We'll be hearing, reading more from each other as the quarter progresses. Thank you.